Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A. Today's fantastic lineup, and there's always great questions and callers. Rabbi, welcome back to the show once again. How are you today, sir?
Thank you. Doing really well today.
Awesome.
Feeling very good today. Thank God.
Glad to hear. Yeah, so it's been everybody's wondering right now because we don't know what the final update is on this God TV. We knew that there was an extension filed, but there was confusion on the 2-week. When did that 2-week period start, and when does it end? And well, first of all, some people don't even know that much. So if you would just kind of back up a little bit more than that, and then start from there.
Let's just go back.
Okay.
To where this all begins.
Okay.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We won't go back that far. We'll just turn back. Let's dial it forward a little bit here. All right. So, God TV is a massive station that broadcasts in nearly 200 countries around the world. Translation, it broadcasts everywhere except Saudi Arabia. God TV is a fundamentalist evangelical station, and they're completely committed to converting people who watch it. Now, Hot TV in Israel is the largest largest cable channel here in Israel. 700,000 homes use Hot TV. It's somewhere about 50% of the market. Hot TV has licenses. They have the license, and they sold the license to God TV. Now, but in order to broadcast, you can't just get a license from the cable company. You also have to give government approval. Like, is this is going into everybody's house? Is this appropriate for all audiences? Is it appropriate at all? Does it violate any laws? So the way the thing was essentially sold was that this was just a Christian TV educational channel, and there are here in Israel, I would say about nearly 200,000 Christians here in Israel. Okay, but what it turned out to be was they were interested, God TV was interested in being here in Israel, and they called the channel here Shalanu, and they are interested in converting all the Jews here to Christianity. And I'm not guessing it, the president and CEO, Ward Simpson, said it himself in a fundraising video and many other subsequent videos. So there's so Ward Simpson and everyone around him, these are bad actors. What's happened is that there was a hearing going back just a few days ago where the government was going to decide whether the approval that was given for the license to Shir Bahat would be revoked or not. Because in this country, minors can't watch anything. And you can't get involved in trying to just like blow every kid's brain away. I mean, just like in the United States and Canada, the kids can't watch anything. And you can't convert children. And when Ward Simpson said that he wants to convert 9 million Israelis, well, that means every Jew. So the point was that when it came down to showtime, I think it was May 19th, the lawyers for God TV requested a 2-week extension to present their case, and in turn they were given 1 week, and that's where we are right now. So they have a few more days, and it's hard to say what's going to happen. My guess is that they're going to be turned down and told that because what they intend on doing here in Israel is completely different than what was submitted and gained the approval, they're going to be told in all likelihood that this is not approved, but if you want, you can resubmit it again. And that's what I think is likely to happen. So they have just a few more days, I believe, till May 27th. And then they have to, and then the government officials have to decide whether if God TV and their channel here called Shalanu can convert all the Jews to Christianity. And really bad, not even presented as though they're converting to Christianity, but rather becoming a Messianic Jew. So changing the language, playing a game of hide the ball. It's a shell game. It's dealing from the bottom of the deck. Again, they're just really bad actors in on that other side. And it would be very confusing to people watching. I mean, it happens to people in the United States where they're watching some TV show and they think they're watching some Jewish show, you know, with wearing a tallis and film. They think they're watching some Lubavitcher show,
right?
And then it turns into this whole thing is really wants you to be a Christian. There's no just a point. So there's no theological difference between what a Messianic congregation believes and what a Protestant denomination believes. Now, there are, in fact, hundreds of Protestant denominations, thousands perhaps. So there are corresponding many different types of Messianic congregations. There are congregations that are, believe it or not, all Lutheran Messianic congregations. You got one in Queens, New York. You have Seventh-day Adventist Messianic congregations. You have charismatic Messianic congregations. So, for example, if you had a charismatic Messianic congregation, it would be no different than what an Assemblies of God church believed down the block, except they just practice a few more Jewish traditions. And today, frankly, in many churches, they're using a lot of Jewish symbols and so on to get back to the original. That's just what's in right now. So right now, there's a few more days left. There's a lot of information out there. I and others have worked very, very hard to make it clear what is out there with the dangers of these groups who are trying to convert the Jews and not even use the word convert. So we'll see what happens, but that's what we're up to right now.
Gotcha. Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, we'll move on to this first caller. Caller, welcome show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, my name is Jay, and my question is, which Christian denomination today most closely resembles first century Christianity and what the first century Christians taught? Which denomination today is the most close to the original first century Christians? Thank you.
Awesome. Go ahead and hang up now, and you can tune in for your answer. Rabbi, go ahead and take it away.
Wow, what a question. All right, so this is in a sense may seem to be a difficult question to answer, but it really is very simple to answer. But it's more complex. The reason this is complex is because anyone who we would regard as a Christian during the first century would hold very different beliefs depending on where they are and how early these Christians lived during the first century. I mean, just think about using the Christian Bible, because there is nothing else. There is no non-Christian author contemporaneous to Jesus that wrote a word about him. So all we have is the Christian Bible. We have nothing else. And there is an enormous evolution that goes on in what Christians believed during the first century. And we can very easily trace that by looking at the Gospels and their age. The earlier they are, the less embellished they are. The later the Gospel is, the more embellished it is. Mark is the least embellished Gospel, but the least embellished Gospel, Mark, a relatively small book, 600 and 78 verses, 16 chapters. It was written roughly 40 years after when Christians believed Jesus was crucified. 40 years! And there was a lot going on before that. We have earlier surviving Christian writings, and those, of course, are the indisputed letters of Paul. Indisputed means that they're letters ascribed to Paul, who these 7 letters, virtually everyone I know believes that they come from the hands of Paul, and those 7 letters were all written during the 50s, starting with 1 Thessalonians, possibly it could have been written in 49, 50, and Romans would be the last of those books, and Romans was written toward the end of the 50s. There are other books, the pastoral epistles that are the writer is claiming to be Paul, but for many reasons it's very unlikely that Paul wrote them. It's very unlikely the person who wrote Galatians or Philippians also wrote 1 Timothy. It's very likely that whoever wrote 1 Timothy also wrote 2 Timothy. But we're going way off the map here. Now, there is a there are so many problems associated with answering that question, but it's really a lot of fun in a way. Fun in maybe a dark way, but there's a different view about Jesus and who he was in Mark than in John. Mark conveys an adoptionist theology. Jesus wasn't born to a virgin. Whoever wrote the book of Mark didn't think there was anything unusual about Jesus' conception, birth, or the city he was born in. We are therefore introduced to Jesus in the book of Mark as an adult at his baptism, just right after the incipit. And then God adopts Jesus as his son. And that's why the words in Mark 1, I believe it's 11, says, a voice comes out of heaven and says, "You are my son, in whom I am well pleased." You are my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. So Jesus discovers, because it's in the second person, that he is the Son of God then. Well, that's, imagine going then just smoking past Matthew and Luke. Those 2 Gospels are probably written about the same time, about 15 years after the book of Mark, meaning some around 80, 85, meaning some 55 years after when Christians believed Jesus was crucified. And then we have a theology where Jesus becomes the Son of God at his conception. And we can actually see that in the Annunciation in the book of Luke. But there's no doubt that Matthew and Luke held that. So now Jesus is really born the Son of God. It's really quite different. And then we go to the book of John, and then we are introduced to Jesus in a prologue. Let me just say this. There's no parallel in the New Testament to the prologue in the book of John. Nothing. Those first 18 verses present Jesus as the Logos, as divine, who came into being in the eternal past. There are 2 things about this. I don't believe for a moment that the author of the 4th Gospel believed that Jesus was God as like God the Father, and we're going to see that later on in the book of John. But he comes from the way past, and the use of Logos is really barred from people like Philo, a Hellenistic Jew who was a contemporary of Jesus, born in 11 BCE, died in the 50s. But whatever that is, that's really quite different. So when you ask which Christian denomination most closely resembles first first century Christians, I would then ask you the question, well, which first century Christians? Do you mean the first century Christians of the year 70 when the book of Mark is produced in adoptionist theology? Are we talking about Matthew? Do you mean John? Because John is written, let's say 10 years after Matthew and Luke, roughly 90, 95. That's all qualifies as first century. But we can tool this down even further. And that is, we can go to the letters of Paul. So in Paul's letters, on virtually every page, in every chapter, Paul's interlocutors, the people he's arguing with, and Paul is arguing with everybody. I don't mean that to characterize Paul in a way that's uncomplimentary. My view of Paul is my view of Paul is not high. I dislike what he did. I detest what he did to the Jewish scriptures. I detest what he did to the God of Israel. I detest what he did to so many billions of people who follow in the Greek ways that he conveyed. Make that clear. But here's the deal. Paul's writings largely are arguing with others who are Christians, but have a different Christology than Paul, had a different view of what it meant to be a Christian. His interlocutors, the people that he disagreed with sharply, basically, we may call them Ebionites, and basically held that Jewish people had to keep the Torah could never be abandoned, and what you see in Acts 15, meaning that non-Jews couldn't eat the meat that was sacrificed to idols, that would have been forbidden. The problem is that the writings of Paul's opponents did not survive, and for good reason. Christians were not interested in recording the writings of what was regarded as what they felt was orthodoxy, and Paul was orthodox. He won, and his opponents lost, and that's why there's a lot of stuff in the Christian Bible that supports Paul, because you not only have 6 letters not written by Paul that claim to be Paul, but you have the book of Acts, which is devoted to Paul. You have 2 Peter that's devoted to Paul. You have Hebrews that carries on the theology of Paul. And you have one book, the book of James, which opposes Paul. Paul looms huge. So when I say that there's a problem in saying which Christian denomination most closely resembles first century Christians, I would say in which decade, at what time, which book. You can see how the first century Christianity is so highly variegated. And what we know, again, about early Christians were written by people who opposed their view. How much can you trust that? And how can we derive anything from a book that we know is not a holy book? There actually are methods to use. Now, I want to take this a little further with you. The word Christian itself. It is very likely that when we are in the first century, certainly in the first 75 years of the first century, it is unlikely that what we would call Christians identify themselves as Christians. We don't find in the Christian Bible that Christians call themselves Christians. Now, that does not mean the word Christian or Christians does not appear in the New Testament. As it turns out, it appears 3 times. And in all cases, that ascription was used by people who were not Christians. So it is quite possible that what we see in recent centuries Christian denominations called Quakers, Methodists. Wesley didn't choose that name. The Quakers didn't choose that name. That was a name chosen by others, and then eventually they just adopted it. And that's likely, we're always using the word, that's likely to be the case here. Okay? So you're getting a feel for it. So the knee-jerk reaction that people would have after hearing this and studying what I'm sharing with you, and what I'm saying to you is completely not controversial, except among fundamentalist Christians who would say that all 13 letters of Paul are indeed from the hand of Paul. They can't stand the idea that Mark is an adoptionist theology. That means God adopted him as an adult, and before then he was just a terrific person. But the dating, the year, this is largely not controversial. This is right down the middle. But now I want to take you deeper and further and earlier. So the word Christian becomes problematic. It really is problematic because the early Christians likely did not use that name. But I want to take you really deep, and I want to go somewhere that I don't think we ever spoke about on air. I do discuss this in volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical in my introduction to Isaiah 53, where I outline what likely happened. So, here, listen very carefully. It is very likely that if we just use that the first followers of Jesus, if I use that term instead of the word Christian, okay, and no Christian would have a problem with that, the first followers of Jesus would then have been Orthodox Jews. But you need to listen like you've never listened in your life. So the term Pharisee is an anachronism. Almost no one uses that term today outside of discussing Second Temple Judaism. In fact, 150 feet from my house, there is a synagogue for Perushim. That's the word. Parsha means those who separate themselves. So technically, there are people who actually use that name, but you've never heard of them, okay? So we need to use the language that we're all familiar with. It all makes sense to us. We have to use not anachronism. We have to use conventional, simple language, and that is Orthodox Judaism. Now, the term Orthodox Judaism, describing what I am, traditional Judaism, is a term that was coined by a non-Jew, there we go again, a few centuries ago, okay? But that's convention. And we need to use conventional language, or else everyone's going to be confused. And people play games with language. And when they do, everyone's confused, they get in trouble, and it becomes very easy to shuffle a deck and just keep dealing yourself aces if you know how to do a full shuffle. We have to keep this really clean. So it is clear that Jesus emerged out of a Pharisaic background. Paul claims to have emerged out of that same world, Galatians 1, Philippians 3, etc., etc. And Jesus, we are told by Matthew, believed that the Pharisees sat in the seat of Moses. They had their authority, and what they conveyed was directly from Moses. Don't do what they do, but certainly do whatever they bid you. And in fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, it is the Pharisees who represent the gold standard of devotion to God. And unless your righteousness exceeds them, heaven is not accessible to you. That's the Sermon on the Mount. Okay? So Pharisaic Judaism, which is Orthodox Judaism, is the same. They would have not in the first century used the term Orthodox Judaism, although the word Jew would have certainly existed in the first century. In fact, the word Jew is in the Bible. Really, where? It's there. It's all over the place. And even people who were not from the tribe of Judah are called Jews. Mordechai, for example, is from the tribe of Benjamin, but he was called a Yehudi, a Jew, and so on. So if you get your scholarship from Wikipedia, you're gone. You're wiped. You're wasted. And you can see how dangerous, how these terms are very dangerous. So, okay, so I want to walk this back with you and just arrange this in a way that everybody gets it. The first followers of Jesus, meaning prior to the crucifixion, are people who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And that's, if you wanted to go back, that's where you'd have to go back. And you're probably going, well, how do you know that? I mean, you may be smart, but do you have access to books that we don't? Okay, I can illustrate this to you. The first century, in the first 30 years, just know this, living in the land of Israel, it was a nightmare. It was the struggle that went on between the Jews and Rome was horrendous, and sometimes worse than others. And it just escalated until the war that Rome had with the Jews in 66 and culminated in the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 and 73. Masada was destroyed and the war was over. Okay. It was really a very, very difficult time. The destruction of the First Temple, relatively speaking, was a cakewalk. Here's the key. There are Jewish traditions about Jesus in our literature, and it is across the board uncomplimentary. Now, one very important point that should be stated is there is enormous controversy over whether the Jesus discussed in the Talmud and other literature is actually the Jesus of Christianity. I'm sorry to do that to you, but But what I want to do is I want to just say, let's presume it is. Although Jesus is not described in any complimentary terms, the one thing he's not accused of is being a false Messiah, which means that during Jesus' life, he definitely did not claim to be the Messiah. Now, if you're paying attention to this broadcast, you have to be asking, how the heck do you know that? Because if, in fact, the Christian Bible is the earliest surviving literature of Jesus' life, if that's all you have, and you really don't have non-Christians writing about Jesus until Pliny the Younger in 112 and Tacitus and 114. Josephus is all nonsense. That's a later interpolation. We're not going there now, but the stuff in Josephus anyway is 94, but in Antiquities, that stuff is a later Christian insertion. You'll ask me why? It's another show. Here's the key point. How can somebody look at an ancient work, which I don't believe is a credible book? It is not the Word of God. Not only is not the Word of God, but the teachings in it are opposed by the Hebrew prophets of Israel. How could I possibly then know anything from it? Because it's all lies. So there are rigorous methods here where I could reasonably conclude that during Jesus' life, no one, including Jesus, thought he was the Messiah. And that would match very well with what is said about Jesus in Jewish literature that's uncomplimentary, but still never accused him of a very, very serious sin to claim you're the Messiah when you're not. There are others who were disparaged for that claim. Jesus is not one of them. And that, in fact, matches well with what we find in the Gospels. Now, there is that pressing question that I alluded to earlier, and that is, how do I know anything is true in the New Testament? How can I rely on anything in there? Well, there are some rigorous methods that can be used that are likely to point us in an important direction. For example, the criteria, let's call it, of embarrassment. Something, well, let's just do it this way. The earliest gospel is the book of Mark. There is probably not a person on earth that read the book of Mark. There's probably not one person on this planet who read the book of Mark but did not yet read the book of Matthew. And you can only imagine the problem that creates. The problem that creates is that because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar in structure, there are many things they have in common. That's why they're called the synoptic gospel. Synoptic, you can hear the two Greek words meaning basically with the same view. It's because Mark is missing so much of what's not in Mark is in Matthew, that if someone reads Matthew first, which usually people do, when you get to Mark, because they're similar, people just fill in the space. Now, if you read Mark without having ever read the book of Matthew, something would hit you in the head, but you'll miss it if you've read Matthew first. What blows your mind away when you read Mark first, and it'd be easy to do it because it's a short book, is that for 8 chapters, that's half of the book. For the first 8 chapters, nobody knows who Jesus is. No one knows who he's the Messiah. It's the biggest secret. And if anyone thinks he's the Messiah, don't say anything. This message we find nowhere else directly in the New Testament. So the earliest book presents Jesus as someone who's running around during his ministry, not a long ministry, and nobody knows who he is. And in fact, it's a huge secret who he is. Moreover, in the Gospels, if we go to Matthew and Luke, we have Jesus asking the people who were hanging out with him right before the crucifixion, "Who do you think I am?" And they don't know. They have no idea. See Matthew 16. They have no idea who he is. Now, if Jesus walked around saying, "I am the Messiah," if he walked around saying the kind of things that John says he said, where Jesus talking about himself incessantly with long discourses, that's what is unique to the book of John, why wouldn't people know? And in fact, when they're guessing who he is, and then Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," the response that Matthew tells us Jesus had for Peter is that flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. You couldn't know that in any way, but God told you that. Now, what that means is you didn't hear it from me. Now, this is not in the middle of Jesus' ministry as recorded in the Christian Bible. And just so you know, Matthew, Mark, Luke presents Jesus' ministry of roughly a year, maybe a little bit longer. John is very notable for Jesus having a 3-year ministry. But I want to, again, push that aside. So here's a very simple point. If Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah, there would be no reason for some writer in the New Testament to say that Jesus wasn't claiming to be the Messiah and no one knew who he was. It would be likely, conversely, that people didn't think he was the Messiah. He was an itinerant whatever in the Galilee area who fell in. He didn't do well with the Romans, possibly saying that the Roman Empire is coming to an end, which would have explained what got him crucified. And then when he got crucified, people who were following him just thought, all right, he's done with. And that disconfirmed anything, any high view of him that they would have had, and they would have walked away from it. And what happened and how did someone come to believe that Jesus rose from the dead is something for another show. So, in fact, if we can say that that the Gospels didn't make up the stuff, that nobody knew who Jesus was, and it's just inconceivable that the Christian Bible, that the writers of the Christian Bible would have invented that if it wasn't true, because it's embarrassing. John is not embarrassing. John, we have massive discourses, and we know, right? John is very, very, very different. So therefore, it is, how likely is it that Jesus was saying that I am the Christ and the Son of the living, all that, and the authors just made up that he didn't say those things? Very, very unlikely. I guess everything's possible. So as it turns out, if I had to reconstruct what most likely went on here, is that there were all these people running around saying the end of the world is near and blah, blah, blah. And certainly in a region like the north, being the Galilee, that could happen. It was a desperate time. And these were plain old religious Jews who we would call Orthodox Jews, who did not think he was a Messiah. And there is no denomination that matches that except for religious Jews who might think someone's really special and then finds out that they're really not special and the kingdom is not coming because of that person. So be careful when you talk about first century Christianity. Christianity went from something, just a sect, a breakaway of Judaism, and these people definitely thought that they were a continuation of Judaism, but they didn't think Jesus was the Messiah. Forget about virgin births. They didn't believe in any of that. In fact, that's why we don't have a virgin birth or any infancy narrative in all of Paul's letters. Did you really believe that Paul didn't think that Jesus' miraculous conception was not important enough to mention? Mark, whoever wrote it, didn't think the virgin birth was significant enough to just one verse for it. He could have surely done that. I mean, we have a lot about a paralytic guy who's healed. One verse about a virgin birth, but it doesn't fit Mark's theology. So because Mark is very clear in stating that it was that nobody knew who Jesus was, and Jesus didn't want anyone to know who he was, that would very well match the criteria of embarrassment, and therefore it would be very unlikely that any Christian would have invented that. John would be very likely, but Mark won't. So therefore the earliest Christians, I know I don't know how to do this, so I'm going to do this. Therefore the earliest followers of Jesus were not Christians in any way. I'm not talking just semantically, but ontologically, but rather they were just religious Jews, peasants in the northern Galilee. And that's why in Paul's letters you can then grasp why everybody who's converting to Christianity are not Jews, but rather they're pagans. And that's who Paul's target audience was. Anyways, thank you for that question.
Very, very interesting answers for sure. Wow, I've never thought about that. I've heard you mention the thing about Mark. I remember Paul about not being aware of a virgin birth. I didn't think about that with Mark. That's pretty interesting as well. Okay, we'll move on to the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show.
I can add a piece.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go.
No.
Let me
go
go
ahead.
with the caller.
Go ahead. The caller can wait. Finish.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I want you to finish your thought because that's what this is
I
about.
want to just share this point with you.
Yes.
Mark is very famous for having a huge interpolation of 12 passages at the end of the book of Mark. If you're sitting down, listen very carefully, don't touch anything else, and just breathe this. Listen, the actual book of Mark ends at chapter 16, verse 8. 9 through 20 is a later interpolation. 12 verses put in. We know why they were put in. They were put in so we have resurrection appearances of Jesus to match the other Gospels. Okay, now here's the question. Listen carefully. Listen very carefully. Why, if the church was going to interpolate passages into the book of Mark so they comport with the other Gospels, why didn't they take a moment to interpolate the virgin birth into the book of Mark? I mean, if you're interpolating the end, why not interpolate the beginning and put 12 verses in the beginning of the book of Mark where Jesus is born to a virgin, and that's something that roughly matches Luke and Matthew, okay? The answer is it can't work. Why? Because he's born to a virgin, then it's known. Then he's already the Son of God. But that doesn't match with the fact that 8 chapters of Mark, nobody knows who Jesus is. So you can have resurrection accounts interpolated into the book of Mark, but you can't have a virgin birth interpolated into the beginning of Mark because it doesn't fit the whole theme of Mark, and that is nobody knows who he is. If he was born to a virgin, well, everybody would know who he was. Let us continue.
Very good, very good. Okay, Rabbi. We'll go and take this caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, it's Steve from Brooklyn. How are you all?
Steve, what's up, brother? How are you?
Okay, so great point that Rabbi brought up. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I mentioned to the missionaries that I meet on Kings Highway. I tell them basically that Christianity is like gas station sushi. I wouldn't touch it if you paid me $1 billion. But I have a very interesting question. I don't think anybody ever asked. Say that Paul, Rabbi always says that if Paul, was grading the book of Acts, he would give it an A+. Let's say Professor Paul, and I say that with tongue in cheek, was grading
you would say that
grading the book of Matthew. Would he give it an F- because of the Sermon on the Mount and because of Matthew 23? The rabbis are given some credence and some street credibility because I have to listen to them. Would Paul give that book a failing grade because of those two items? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, go ahead and hang up, man. We can talk to you soon.
Sure.
All right, bye. All right, bye. You were going to say something.
Oh, the answer. Yeah,
you said not Matthew. What did you mean by that?
Okay, so what I have said in the past is that Paul almost certainly did not write the book of Hebrews, but the book of Hebrews is Pauline, meaning if Paul ever saw the book of Hebrews, he would have given the author an A+. That's all I'm saying.
Gotcha. Okay, go ahead with this main
question. So he's asking the question about how would Paul feel about the book of Matthew? So the answer is that he would have been appalled by the book of Matthew because of the Sermon on the Mount, because of Matthew 5:17, for example, where we are told Jesus says, "I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law, and anyone who changes any of the slightest part of it would be considered least in the kingdom of heaven, and your righteousness would have to exceed that of the Pharisees and scribes in order to enter the kingdom of heaven." That would have been revolting to Paul. The parable of the sheep and the goats in the book of Matthew would have been a nightmare to Paul. Because here we are told in the parable that basically the people who are going to go to heaven are people who do good deeds in their lives. Well, that is insane to Paul. That is antithetical to everything Paul teaches. In fact, I could play with you on this and show you that the parable of the sheep and the goats is even more revolting to Paul than the Sermon on the Mount. Because the Sermon on the Mount has a twist in it, and that is, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, and just understand that the Pharisaic standard was the gold standard, okay? But you got to be better than them, which may be somehow implying that no one could be better than them because they are the most devout, the most loyal. So therefore, but how is it that the people who believed in me, they're not necessarily going to be saved, but those who are going to go to heaven are the ones who live a moral life and did that which is right? In Paul's view, no one can do that. That's impossible. Man is lost. Man is born drowning. There is nothing he can do that's good. That's everywhere in Paul. Look, Romans chapter 3, this is all over the place, but it's all over the place. And Romans 3 is famous because Paul, misquotes passages, rips them apart and sews them together and quotes Psalm 14, but it's out of context, but it's not important. That is what Paul believed. The book of Romans is like the constitution of the New Testament. So surely he would find that type of talk to be utterly repulsive. Now, as it turns out, I'm not going to go here because it's going to go beyond the scope of this show. But as it turns out, gospels are not internally compatible with themselves, and that's because they're picking up from many, many sources. So or they're written by multiple authors. I do not believe that whoever wrote the book of John, and I mean from chapter 1, verse 19, all the way to the end of chapter 20, is the same author as whoever wrote the prologue. I don't think so. I can't say I guarantee it, but it's just unlikely to me. I am not the only one who holds that the prologue has a different author, because there's no other talk about Logos anywhere else. And you have in the book of the book of John, many, many passages that show the reverse, that Jesus was entirely subordinate to the Father, could do nothing but what the Father sent him to do, John chapter 5, verse 30, and all over. So you have in any one of these books contradictory texts, because these books went on to be refined, they were altered, they were tampered with, and they're also sewn together. Matthew had many, many sources from which he was relying on. He's relying on the book of Mark. Not that he's relying on Mark. It's not like he looked at the book of Mark and said, oh, there's a good idea. He copied Mark, almost all of it. Luke copied it, almost all of it. Matthew is using a source that's lost. And the only other person who had access to that source that we know of is Luke. And those passages, less than 300 verses that Matthew and Luke share, but don't appear in the book of Mark, they're called a source or a cue, whatever. So, and then there are things that are just in Matthew and nowhere else. So that means this is pasting together, you copy and pasting it all together. But Paul would have been very unhappy with some of the things that we find in the book of Matthew, for sure, absolutely. He would have been delighted that Matthew was quoting from the Jewish scriptures a lot, because Paul did that as well. Different verses, but they both did the same thing. They both ripped the Jewish scriptures to pieces, quoted them out of context, mistranslated, surgically altered them. Don't ask. So, yeah, Paul would have loved the book of Hebrews. Many parts of the book of Matthew he would not have liked. The author of the pastoral epistles would also, but I don't believe that was Paul, would really have not liked the virgin birth story, because it seems clear that in the pastoral epistles, the author is saying, stop, don't harangue yourself with all kinds of genealogies and myths. And I think he was from a community that didn't like the virgin birth and so on. So, yeah, I think he would have been very unhappy with much of the book of Matthew, especially what I'm discussing. Also in the book of Luke, the king who had sons, and one son went astray but came back and repented. That would really be inconceivable to the writer of the book of Romans and Galatians and so on. Paul would have been shocked to hear that his big promoter, Luke, not in Luke, but in Acts, would write anything of the sort that Elizabeth and Zachariah were absolutely sinless and kept all the commandments, Luke chapter 1, verse 6. Well, you can't do that in Paul's view. So these books don't agree with each other. And that's why, just listen for a moment, that's why you can listen to 18 different Christians who have really very different views, and they can really support their view from the Christian Bible. They just have to select the verses that support their view and then ignore all the other verses and then give them some torturous spin or just not deal with them. That's why you can almost prove anything from the New Testament, because you have such a highly variegated views and Christologies that you can come up with anything and legitimately find verses to support it. It's very easy to do that because there's so much conflict, both between different books and even within the same book. So that's a really great question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good question. Very good. All right, we're going to move on to the caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Caller, you are live on the air. Can you hear us? Give them about 3 or 4 more seconds, and then we'll hang up and switch to a different caller. So when you guys call in, be prepared to hold for up to 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes. I don't know, however long it takes for Rabbi to finish up a question. So stick tight on it because it's always good stuff. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hello, my name is Michael, and I'm from Germany.
Hello, Michael. Welcome.
Shalom.
Did you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It sounds...
Shalom.
Go ahead.
Shalom. I have a question about the development of the Catholic Church and interreligious relationship. Blessings were included, like the Good Friday prayer for the Jews. Besides my opinion, they are a nice prayer to God asking to convert the Jews. The Church has officially believed the Pharisees of murdering the Lord, but the Barabbas scene and the Judas scene are not commented now. In the Gospels, besides that they are later, we added. We had now actually the Apostolic Synod, and they take women to higher positions in the church and add non-priests in the ceremony. And now they allowed the South American new Christians to include their traditions, like to pray to a statue calling Pachanama. It's the statue of a pregnant, naked woman.
Caller, do me a favor real fast, if you don't mind. I need you to turn your speakers down. If you're listening, if you're talking to me and you're at your desk and your speakers are on where you can hear, can you turn your thing down? I'm hearing a really difficult. I'm finding it very difficult to hear what you're saying. If you would, please.
I'll just want to say this. I have a confession to make, because I don't understand at all what you're saying. It may be best. It sounds like you're in speaking into a speaker, and there's all this just sound bouncing off the walls. So if you speak really close into the speaker, and if you could just restrict the question, just because I want to be able to answer your question best and understand you.
My question was that the Catholic Church has now changed the official status from some doctrines, like that the Pharisees are not guilty now for the murdering of the Christ, but these scenes are not commented in the Bible now, and now they have added to the believings from the South American Christians that they are allowed to pray to a statue named Pachanama, and it's a naked pregnant woman. That's absolutely true. And they try to help the Gentiles to come to the church in the fact that they allow them to hold on their traditions. And now my question is that all, like the Pope dropped the Patriarch of the West title in the Annurio 2006, to heal the breach between Catholics and other Christians. And now it's the same happens. We have the traditional Catholic Church on the one side from the ocean, and on the other side from the ocean, they try to add more from the traditional believers from the Gentiles to absorb more new Christians. Is that
okay? I got your question, Michael. I got it. Thank you.
Is it the same like what Paul did?
Yep.
Yes. My question is what Paul did? Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael, for your call. And go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your answer, okay? Okay, Thanks. Rabbi, go ahead. Please, if you would, reestablish the question for me, please.
You don't pay me enough.
That's
I definitely have to renegotiate our contract. If you do that. What am I? What is it? What do you think?
That's fine.
All right.
Okay.
All right. I thank you. Michael's a very sweet fellow from Germany. He's extremely bright, very intelligent fellow, and I want to sort of break that down because I have a very good idea of what he's asking. So I've lectured pretty much all over the world in every continent except for the really cold one. So I can attest for you that Roman Catholicism is practiced very differently in Washington and New York than it is in Sao Paulo and Rio. Very different in Mexico City. Very different in Sydney. And what the Catholic Church has succeeded in doing is becoming anything you want it to be and adjusting itself to make everybody happy. And something that the church has done for a very long time, but for us, what is very striking is, and you alluded to this, is adopting whatever pagan ideas already exist into the Catholicism of that region so that Roman Catholicism closely matches the indigenous pagan religions of the region, Central America. So pagan practices in Mexico are just simply woven into Roman Catholicism, and the priests go within, the Vatican nods to it. And you alluded to the Second Vatican Council, which was initiated by Pope John the 23rd, who was often referred to as the Papa Bueno, the good Pope. And relatively speaking, he was a nicer guy, especially about the Jews. And he didn't live long enough for the Second Vatican Council to close. But one document that is very well known is Nostra Aetate in our time. In it, it doesn't, it's not like, you're reading the Jewish press. It's not that. But it does state that the Jews, many things, including the Jews of our time, are not culpable for anything that was done during the first century. And therefore, some prayers were modified, like the Good Friday liturgy of the perfidious Jew, the treacherous Jew. Now, the Mel Gibson type Catholics actually really like to say that, and they utterly reject Second Vatican Council. There's a whole bunch of these ultra-conservative Catholics that considered John the 23rd to have been a complete apostate. There are guys like that, and there are a lot of them, and believe that the last legitimate pope was Pius XII. Hitler's Pope. So when the Catholic Church has done this always very, very well throughout history, and that's why it's really successful. It's able to just amalgam it's able to just to be so elastic that whatever you want evolution, fine. You don't believe in Satan, well, going with that. This is just in the last year, in recent years. And if I didn't say this, I think you'd miss a lot of this. Right now, you'd miss something very important. Right now, the Roman Catholic Church is interested in really one thing, and that's why this Pope came in. This South American Pope now leads a church, although Benedict XVI is still alive, and that is, it's all right now damage control. Do I need to explain? The Roman Catholic Church now is embroiled in the most horrific scandal, and that is that the children of the church have been destroyed. They have been destroyed, and the Catholic Church have been molested, and the Catholic Church very directly were committed to protecting the priests who committed these unspeakable crimes, moving them to other parishes. I don't need to tell you, that. So everything is about putting a smiley face, and this Pope really is like a smiley guy. He's like, that's the thing. And it's about damage control, okay? And therefore, whatever you want, we'll serve it up to you. I mean, just anything. So that's why you have such, high, such variance in the Roman Catholic Church in terms of practice, beliefs, doctrines, liturgy. It's all over because it simply adopts whatever the indigenous beliefs were and just says, fine. And if the beliefs in North America of Roman Catholics, let's say in the United States today, I think there's some 65 million Roman Catholics in the United States today, something like that. I might be off. I think 81% disagree with the Roman Catholic Church on the social issues, big time. It's fine. Just adapt to it. So that's what's really going on. It's interesting that during the time of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, one of the points that Catholic leaders raised was if you have this breakaway from the Catholic Church, because fundamentally the difference between Protestantism and Roman Catholicism is ecclesiastical authority. I mean, you have to know that, because you have expressions of Protestantism which are its practice and liturgy and all across the board are virtually identical to Roman Catholic Church. And of course, I'm talking about the Anglican Church. So an argument that Catholics put forward in why the Protestant movement, the Reformation, was a really bad idea, is that you're going to, instead of having one pope, you're going to have 1,000 popes. And it was a very interesting argument, and it worked out. It worked out because that's why you have hundreds, thousands of sects within the Protestant movement with really different beliefs, and many of them believe that if you don't belong to your sect, you're not even saved. Many of them believe that only if you belong to our denomination, if you're baptized in our church, do you have salvation. You're baptized in another church, you don't. So in a strange way, that did happen. But in another sense, the Catholic Church simply it's like the horns of the image that Daniel witnessed in chapter 7 in the night vision of the fourth beast, that it's indescribable. What is that? Daniel asked the angel. What is this thing with 10 horns and then a little horn it's not the lion with wings. It's not the bear with ribs in its mouth. It's not a goat it's not a leopard with 4 heads. What's that? And Daniel is going to hear a lot about that 4th kingdom. And one of the things is it's just everything. It's all over. And if you look at the 4 horses, so you have the red, white, black, but then there's this 4th horse that's just ash color, and it's just everything. And that's the nature of Edom, and that's the nature of the Roman Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is able to twist itself and become whatever it thinks the people want to hear, as long as they stay in the church and show allegiance to the Pope, even if they don't follow him. Okay? So, Michael, thanks for that question.
Very good question for sure. All right. Caller, I think I just lost a caller. Caller, you live? We're live on the air. Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Hello? Can you guys hear me?
We are good. I thought I lost the call there for a second, but yeah, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
My name is John. I'm calling from California.
Welcome, John.
And how are you guys doing?
Doing good, thank you. God,
well, yeah. Take a look.
Thank God.
My question is that I've been talking to a Christian person and trying, expose the truth to him here and there, and he said that the Jewish people left the commandments of God when, because it was always passed down from the father, of if you're going to be a Jew, like from the King of David. And he says now they have they ask you if your mother was a Jew, then you're a Jew, but if your father was, then you're not. I don't know, it just, him saying that kind of caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond to that.
Okay, so basically your question is how does one know biblically whether you're a Jew or not, according to Torah?
Well, he's asking that there seems to be a contradiction between, you're from what tribal line,
right.
based on your father, Jewish. That's really a good question.
Okay, go ahead and hang up now, and you continue for your answer. Okay, thank you.
All right. So you guys got it, because he said something like.
I actually got it.
Okay.
And because that question comes up a lot,
you betcha.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Awesome.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
You all be safe.
Very good. Okay,
wash your hands. It's so cute for me. I'm gonna explain it.
Okay.
I tell them to wash their hands. Like I tell my parents, like, wash your hands. Did you wash your hands? And it's so weird that I'm like, I tell Mom, did you wash your hands, please? Mm-hmm. I never in my life imagined that one day I'm gonna say, Mom, did you wash your hands? You went out shopping? Right. And that's what's going on. How this is germane to this show is beyond. I have no clue.
Okay.
I just thought I would share the world.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
my understanding, it wasn't the same. So tell me, I'm typing up the question now. Tell me what to type.
And when did you become my secretary?
I think I've been your secretary for 6 years now.
Has it been 6 years?
It has been. Well, actually, we're in the 6th year right now. We're getting close to November. Will be 6 years.
So, if your tribe identity is conveyed through a patrilineal line, biological patrilineal line, as for example, you are from the tribe of Judah. If your father's from the tribe of Judah, not your mom. Mom plays no role in that. And we know that it's everywhere. King Solomon was from the house of David because of his dad, not because of his mom. The Torah says that openly everywhere. Very famously and repeated more frequently than anywhere else is the book of Numbers. And the book of Numbers received such an odd name because it begins with a census. And if you want to know what tribe you're from, Lemishbechaisam Leveisavaisam, all over the first chapter, chapter 1, verse 18. According to your family, according to your father's house. That's how you know your tribe identity. But as it turns out, that doesn't, your father doesn't in any way determine if you're Jewish or not. Only your mother can do that. So if you have a Jewish mother, you are Jewish. So your mother determines if you're Jewish, and we're using the word Jewish is not used, that exact term is not used in Tanakh, but it really is. I mean, you find people who say, who the Tanakh tells us were Jews, even if they weren't from the tribe of Judah. Why? It's because of a blessing that Jacob gave to Judah in Genesis 49, verse 8, 9, 10, that all your brothers will praise you. However, you know you're Jewish only through who your mother is. So therefore, you could understand that variation. But the question is, I can't tell you why, because this is God's plan, and the Bible is silent on that. It means there's nowhere in the Bible that says, well, this is why. Hashem is saying this is it. And therefore, for example, we have many, many examples in Tanakh where you have a product of an intermarriage. And if the child of a Jewish father, if the child is a product of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, that child is not considered Jewish in Tanakh. Very famously, Ezra chapter 10. And there you have a lot of guys. These were what's called the Shovevei Tzion, those who returned to Zion to build a second temple. There were 42,360 Jews who left Babylon under the leadership of a man named Zerubbabel and Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok, the nephew of Ezra and the grandson of Soroya, the high priest in the first temple. And when Jews came to the land of Israel, it was a small group, relatively speaking, because the vast majority of Jews stayed behind in Babylon. That's going to be a really big issue. But what is most germane to your question is that when Ezra enters the land of Israel, he comes a little later. Ezra, as it turns out, does not even emerge in the book of Ezra until chapter 10. Ezra does not arrive in the land of Israel with the first wave of Jews, and the census of who came in, we even know their family names, is what Ezra chapter 2 is about. That's why a lot of people don't read Ezra chapter 2. They should, but don't, because there are a lot of gems there, but people have trouble with genealogies because they don't know why it's there. And that's why people have trouble with the first 9 chapters of the book of Chronicles. So therefore, when Ezra, who was the giant of the generation, he was the great Torah scholar of generation. Now we know Ezra as he's called the scribe, but we don't really have him scribing stuff. We know Ezra as the priest, but we have nothing in Tanakh about him doing any priest things. He is, but he's not. There's nothing in there about him doing any of that. We don't have any prophecy in a sense from Ezra in a conventional sense. But Ezra is the Torah giant of the generation. That's what's very important. So it's ironic that Ezra is not doing what a lot of people think prophets would do, and he's not doing what priests would do. He was a priest, but he isn't. When Ezra arrives in Eretz Yisrael, he had stayed behind because his teacher was Baruch ben Neriah, who was a disciple of Jeremiah, and he stayed behind in Babylon to care for and to be with his teacher. And once Baruch ben Neriah passed away, then he came to Eretz Yisrael. He comes a little later. The point is, when he arrives, the kind of Jews that he encounters there were very disappointing to him. And Jews took non-Jewish women as wives and had children with them. So if your Jewish identity was conveyed by the father rather than the mother, well, those children would have been Jewish, and they were not. And Ezra told them, out. These women are forbidden to you, and their children, they go with their mothers. They're not part of Klal Yisrael. We see many examples of this in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 13, 6 or 7, depending on what kind of Bible you're using. But the Torah specifically says, if your brother, it's talking about if your brother means a member of the Jewish people, is a seducing you into idolatry. That's what Deuteronomy 13 is about. It begins with the false prophet and then continues with the seducing Jew. It means someone among you, and he's trying to get you to follow gods that you didn't know. Well, how do you know that he's a Jew? Though the passage begins, if your brother, the son of your mother. Nothing there about the son of your father, because if it's just the son of your father and not the son of your mother, he isn't Jewish, and therefore he is not achicha, he is not your brother. So therefore, tribe identity is conveyed only by the father, and Jewish identity is only conveyed by the mother. There are people who go, oh, the reason why Judaism says that it's only the mother that conveys Judaism, because you always know who the mother is, but you can't really be sure who the father is. Well, of course, that's nonsense, because tribe identity is conveyed through the father, and this is part of God's plan. And how do we know it? Because my God says so, my Bible says so, the Torah says so. The Torah doesn't tell us anything about the genetics or how this is conveyed, but it's explicitly in Tanakh. And people ask this question. It's a really good question. Sometimes, 95% of the time when people ask that question, they're really just curious about this, and they're confused about it, and they should be, because they're not familiar with the passages. And then 5% of people ask this, and their motive is not the best. Their motive is to try to poke holes in Judaism. Judaism is completely inconsistent. Or the Judaism practiced today, Orthodox Judaism, is completely different than what was practiced during biblical times, which is completely not true. So that's your answer. We see this all clearly in Scripture, and we're really curious as Jews about God's opinion, and that's what God's opinion is, and that's why we follow it. Thank you for your question. I think we have time for one more question.
Daddy had to go inside for a minute.
Okay, well, do you have a question for me?
Not really, no.
So let me ask you this. This is a white shirt.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually tailor-made in Indonesia.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or not. So in the Far East, it's a really big deal to have. They make your shirts and suits. They make it for you. Not you don't go into store and just pick it off the
wow.
the shelf. Yeah, because in Indonesia, the people generally don't wear this European kind of dress, and they certainly don't wear jackets, because Indonesia is one of 14 countries that are actually on the equator. Point is, it's really hot, and to walk around with a suit, full jacket would be unbearable, right?
Yeah.
So, but the people who need to dress like this, so they just have a tailor-made, and it's really, really, really cheap.
Wow.
So I think this shirt that was sewn together for me, I think cost like $6.
Really?
And it's all cotton. Yeah,
wow.
Really. And it was made, it's really, in the Far East, this is a common practice to go to a tailor and they make it for you, and it's really very inexpensive. I mean, to have a shirt tailor-made for you in the United States would cost a lot of money, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
That's what it's into. Do you like it in white or blue? What do you prefer?
Blue.
You like the blue better than the white?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. My mom thinks I look more handsome in blue than white. That's what she told me. Because you look handsome in blue. So there you go. So, okay. So, what are you wearing today? Because I can't see you.
It's a American shirt with a flag.
American shirt with this. So you're wearing patriotic stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, which means that you're from Texas and you're not from Vermont. I got it. Okay. Because like there's a different. I would imagine that there's certain things you can wear in Texas that would just fit in perfectly, and in the state of Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy, they might not fly. Just a guess. I'm not sure. All right. So, all right. Is your dad? So what we'll do is we'll wait for your dad to come back.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll do that. So could you imagine like living in Jakarta? I lived there for 5 years. And you're not on the equator, but like a degree below the equator, but you're really close to it. The equator actually runs through Borneo. But it's hot all the time. It's like every day it's like 95 to 100. In fact, the one question no one ever asks in Indonesia is how's the weather, or what do you think of the weather? Because there's only hot and hotter. That's it. So there's there's no antifreeze in Indonesia. You can't get it.
Wow.
Because you don't need it. They just use water, desalinated water. Do you know that the cars made for the Indonesian market, this is so interesting, and I only noticed this like 2 years after I was living in Indonesia, that the cars have no heater.
Really?
That means, your car, when you're driving a car, you can make the air conditioner go on by turning the knob to the blue area, so then the air conditioner goes. And if you want it to be warm, you turn to the red area.
Yeah.
Well, the cars for the Indonesian market have no red area. There is no such thing as a heater in Indonesia.
Wow. That's crazy.
Wow. It's wild. I mean, because it's, as I said, it's just, I don't even recall ever the temperature going below 80. I don't think so. I don't think ever. I mean, it's like, it's really quite warm. And of course, they don't need antifreeze.
Yeah.
Because never, And I don't know how people survive without air conditioning, but they do. They're very comfortable with it. So, yeah. And Shabbat starts at pretty much the same time every single Friday.
Wow.
Because it's so close to the equator that the variance is just no more than like 20 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
From one side. That's right. There's none of that, Shabbos starting so early, Shabbos starting so late. There's none of that going on. None of that going on in Jakarta or
kind of cool.
Or Singapore, same deal. Shabbos starts roughly about the same time.
Yeah.
And of course, oversignal. So there's a very interesting. Is your dad back yet?
Not yet. Taking a while.
Interesting. How interesting. So, did you have any other questions about the Far East?
Don't think so.
So, Indonesia is a country made up of 17,000 islands.
Whoa.
Imagine that. 17,000 islands.
Whoa, that is weird.
Most are not inhabited. And sometimes when you're diving, you'll just you'll jump off the boat, do your dive, and then you come up to the shore of an island and no one lives there.
Wow.
The island could be the size of a basketball court. Just this, and no one lives there. And you just walk around, and you're going, wow. Because when you dive, you have boots on, really thick boots, and the fins go over the boots. Typically, there's two ways, but that's typically. So you just walk around these islands where there are species of animals found nowhere else in the world. a place of stunning beauty and enormous biodiversity. In fact, if you ever, the only thing I like about the New York Times is the science section. I think it's Tuesday. And, whenever they discover a new mammal, a new plant, or weird thing, it's usually Indonesia or Malaysia or the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
They don't go. In New York, they found a new orangutan that's never been seen before. And that's not where it's from. It's Indonesia. Really, when you go through these places where almost no one's been, you see things that you can't even imagine. And very often the fish, the marine life, and the plant life, many things you see have not yet been categorized yet, because they haven't.
I'll have to show him some of your pictures. We haven't seen any of your diving pictures in a long time.
I haven't, and you know why? Because I haven't. In fact, today I think marks the first 1-year anniversary of my moving to the land of Israel.
Wow.
So it's not that Israel doesn't have diving; it does, but haven't gotten around to that. I look forward to that. But yeah, it's a place of enormous, very striking beauty. Anyways, William, it was a really wonderful show. It was great having me on, and it was a big pleasure to see you.
Yes, it was great having you on. It always is. I'm going to break David into to hosting this from time to time, but he says no. He doesn't like the camera.
No, he's good. He carried the whole conversation.
Very good, very good. That is good to hear. David, you did a good job, son.
Yeah. So watch out. You have competition.
I do. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Well, that's been a great show then, Rabbi. Thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week, Hashem willing. Same time, same place. So, callers, thank you for calling in. We can't get to all the calls, but we do try, and we'll try to keep track of the voice messages as well. So what you're going to want to do is when you call in and leave a message, be very, very clear. First of all, I've been getting word that when you call in, it doesn't actually ring for some reason. I'm going to go in and see if I can figure that out. So I just did the wrong thing. Hang on, so I'm trying to get rid of something, and it didn't work. So what you want to do is you call in and leave your name, where you're calling from, because that's always nice to have, and what your actual question is. Kind of in a very short, clean package, so we can present it on air if we can find that it will fit one of our shows. So definitely do that, though. Don't get discouraged because you can't get in. Still call in and leave us a good message on your questions, okay? And then and that's pretty much going to wrap it up. One more thing I got to do real fast. Out of breath. Also out of shape, it sounds like. So, Rabbi, we will see you again next week. Thank you so much for your time. Love you guys, and we'll tune in. Later, guys. Peace.
תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד.